let me introduce myself. I'm McGilla. My name is Mike, but I'm known as McGilla in NER, and I help run NER. And Ken has been kind enough to work with us to be able to do these skill days with people, but we like to make it available to people. And I think that we've developed a culture of people who like to ride safely and with some skill and want to learn. So we're grateful for Ken Condon. Obviously, is riding in the zone is Ken's. Ken and Tony also do track days. They used to own track days, and now they do non-sport bike track days, which again, they work through NER to invite people to come to that. I'd highly encourage you to do that if you haven't done it before. I mean, for no other reason that it's a ton of fun. But the other is that you'll leave there with a skill set that you didn't have when you got there. And it's a continuation. That's why I say that's why I continue to go time after time, is because nobody learns how to ride a motorcycle in a day and you're done. It's a lifelong learning event. So with that being said, Ken Condon.
If you don't know who I am, I just recommend that you go to the website if you're curious, because I like to know who's sort of giving me advice, because anybody can be an expert these days, apparently. So yeah, at the website ridinginthezone.com, if you want to read my resume, and go up there up to the menu, and there's about Ken up there. So I do an advanced parking lot course that I developed after being an MSF instructor for 25 years. One of the things we start with right away is the slow speed maneuvers, because really it's something that takes a lot of bandwidth, and to do it at the beginning of the day when we're fresh seems to make the most sense. But I want to start off by just saying that, what we're going to talk about today is slow speed maneuvers. That's the hard part about riding a motorcycle, is actually managing it when it's not moving at, 30, 40, 50 miles an hour. The thing wants to fall over. And so what do we do about that? Well, we have to know what it wants for us to help it to stay upright. And because naturally gravity wants it to be on its side, and because it just sits on two contact patches. So we need to manage that. But the good news is that that's totally doable. And one thing, though, that you have to understand is that even though we put a lot of attention to it, and even spend time with the parking lot course doing this as one of our primary sort of drills, is that it's not the thing that's going to kill you. Like on the road, I don't know of anybody that has gotten killed by dropping their motorcycle. Now, there are scenarios we can certainly come up with, and I'm going to talk a bit about that, in that, you try to make a U-turn in the wrong spot, and, you get creamed by a car because you dropped your bike in the middle of the road or something like that. So that can happen for sure. But like I say, we put a lot of focus on this because it's, we value our motorcycles. We don't want to drop it because it'll scratch, and it's expensive. And, it's embarrassing, and it just sucks. So let's face it, I dropped motorcycles plenty, and it's going to happen. The only time I got injured was I dropped a VFR 800 on my foot because I didn't take a disc lock off. So you learn the lesson about that. So you move about 3 feet and then you come to an abrupt halt, and then down it went. So I did break my foot then. So you can get injured, don't get me wrong. It can definitely happen. So if ever you are in a situation where your bike's going to fall over, it's easy to say that, don't try to hold it up, because, none of us are really quite strong enough to hold up a 600-pound motorcycle. So you really need to be careful about that thought about, I can save it. You'll strain yourself and hurt yourself. Now, that said, your adrenaline and just your reaction is going to be that you're going to try to save it. And that's just natural. I do it myself. At some point, if it happens quick enough, you won't have the time to think about it. And that's really the key to, if things don't go well, just step off. Want to stress is that I will give you my tips and all that, but that it really takes practice. Now, I can do a U-turn that's what I do. If I rent a motorcycle, if I'm off, the first thing I do is I go to the parking lot and I do U-turns. I want to get a sense of just what the balance is on that bike. Every bike's going to be different. The clutch friction zone, which is critical, the rear brake, just the balance of it, what it takes to make a turn. Because to make a tight turn, it's the other thing, you can make turns and then there's tight turns. And so if you really need to make a tight turn, that's going to require, a more extreme handlebar angle, and even more sort of sense of confidence that the bike is going to, you're able to balance it. A lot of times people say, well, I'm not very strong. Well, either am I. Don't count on strength. It's not about strength. It's about balance. And so you're going to use the tools that, or I should say the controls that the motorcycle have to help maintain that balance. That is the key. All right. So we're going to talk about that. So I did put together a slideshow, and I think it's just, the way to go as far as like getting through all the points, and we can chat and questions at any time. So first thing that I want to address, and this is what we address when doing the parking lot course, is just how do you ride slowly? Because when you're talking about U-turns, you're talking about slow turning. Well, let's start with just going straight in a straight line. So this motorcycle in traffic, we do this all the time. If you can, have that motorcycle be creeping along and not have to put your foot down, until you have to put your foot down. But if you're able to go at like say 5 miles per hour consistently and not saw at your handlebars, left, right too much, because you do that, that helps you balance because you're moving the contact patch out from under the center of gravity. That's why you do that. And it helps you maintain balance. But that means that you're relying on that tool only to keep you in balance. Whereas if you keep your eyes up and you get yourself, with a steady drive, and you're not making big changes, like if you use those handlebars, oftentimes we'll overcorrect, and then we have to overcorrect to correct the overcorrection. So it's a matter of being relaxed, and this is counterintuitive. So because the bike wants to fall over, but that's kind of key. So you start with just going really slow in a straight line, and we do a little slow race on the parking lot. But you have to keep your speed steady. If you're using your throttle only to keep your speed at a really steady 5 miles per hour, you're going to have trouble because the throttles are lurchy. And so you need to use other tools in addition to the throttle. The throttle's there when you think about slow speed maneuvers. You want to think of the throttle as just on enough so that you don't stall. All right. That's all it is. So it is not a speed control. It's a RPM control. Okay, because stalling is the #1 reason why people fall over when they do U-turns, slow U-turns, because you lose any stability that you had. And 5 miles an hour is enough to get stability so that you can roll along, and you prove it to yourself every time you're in traffic. How slow can you go? I know some people that can go down to 0 miles per hour and still keep their feet up on the pegs, at least for a short period of time, and that's excellent. So 5 miles per hour should be very doable. 3 miles per hour should probably be pretty doable. Can you do that with a passenger? That's a great thing to practice because, we have passengers and we have to do these maneuvers with them on the back, and we have a responsibility of being able to do them so that we don't, cause them to have to step off the bike as it falls. So but you got to keep that speed steady. And the balance part, as I was mentioning, turning the handlebars, because when you do that, the contact patch of that front tire is moving left and right. And the way the geometry is on the motorcycle, it will help keep, it's like the, balancing a broomstick on the palm of your hand. It's that kind of thing. So that's why you do it, and you naturally do it. You don't have to think about it. And that's the case with a lot of things when it comes to balance. You've got proprioceptors, that are ingrained, that you naturally will kind of kick in, and you'll do things that will kind of keep you in balance. So again, that speed control, if you're going like 5 miles per hour, depending on your bike, that's oftentimes slower than first gear. So you have to use the friction zone, that's the clutch. And now I use the rear brake even when I'm going straight because it gives me something to pull against. So it keeps the drivetrain taut. So if you have the RPMs up just slightly, you don't rev it, and then you slip the clutch and you drag the rear brake, and you can go really slow, and you can keep that speed at 5 miles per hour. I mean, if you go to 6 miles per hour, that might be too fast. When you start incorporating the turn, you need to keep it at a specific speed. Otherwise, you're going to upset your path of travel. So this is where you start, is right here. It's just straight line, slow speed turning. And this is something we do all the time. So every time you're out in traffic, just go slow. Try to, make sure it's safe to do so. Look in your mirror. Don't slow down too much, or to make sure that it's safe for you to do it. But this is when it comes to being a proficient rider and toward mastery, is you find opportunities anytime you can to increase your ability. In this case, it'll be balance and using the tools that will help you become better at doing U-turns. So some variables that'll interrupt your drive, because this is the one thing that when we're moving along on a motorcycle, that if you do go from 5 miles per hour to 2 miles per hour, you have lost an incredible amount of stability. If you go from 5 miles per hour to 7 miles per hour, you're going to gain stability, but that might be too fast for you to make the turn that you're intending to do. Or, again, think about the percentage of increase of speed from 5 to 7 miles per hour. That's a very large percentage of increase. So that actually feels scary. So when a bike, right now, I bought a Tenere 700, and one of the things the Yamaha I can't seem to figure out is that real fine throttle control. Sometimes, it's not every time, but it'll lurch, and I'm getting it fixed because it's just at the very fine, high level that I want that bike to. I don't want the bike to get in the way of the level of control that I expect. And so you can do it with a clutch now, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. So the variables that will interrupt drive are if you can use the front brake at slow speeds, but I don't recommend it because your front brake is going to be very powerful. So a slight bit of front brake is going to give you a whole lot of brake power. And that's way more than you want when you're going 5 miles per hour, because that will put you down to 2 miles per hour very quickly, unless you have really, really good feel with your front brake. So I do recommend the rear brake, because the rear brake does not have that power, and it's really a control brake. That's what we call it, the control brake. So also, if you rely on the throttle, like we talked about, that you try to keep it in one spot, but you increase a little bit, it could lurch. You decrease a little bit, it could, same thing. So you don't want to rely on the throttle as your control, your speed control when you're going slow. Excuse me. If you disengage the clutch, this is something that I see a lot of folks who struggle. When you get anxious, what do? You grab the clutch, but you're going to lose. You're now going to go from that 5 miles per hour, and it'll pretty quickly go down to 2 miles per hour. So a lot of times when people are struggling with this, they'll squeeze, release, squeeze, release, squeeze, release. And that's a mistake. You want to keep that clutch just right in a very slight bit of the friction zone. Again, it's sort of like what I was saying about with the correcting with the handlebars. We tend to overcorrect if we're anxious, and we have to, correct more to correct our first overcorrection. Same thing can happen with the clutch. So keep that clutch just moving very slightly, because that's all you need. You're just using that clutch to control the amount of drive that's getting to your rear tire, and you're not relying on that throttle to do it. Now, when it comes to stalling, now I mentioned that before, that's what will cause you to fall over if you're in the middle of any kind of lean at all, and it can cause you to fall over even if you're straight up and down, for various reasons. So not enough throttle. So if you think about when you're doing any maneuver that requires you to ride slower than first gear and needing to use the friction zone, your clutch, elevate your throttle just a little bit. Don't rev it. When you get good at this, it'll be just and like that. So any more than that, and you can relax. It kind of shows that you're anxious. So relax. Just a little bit of elevated throttle. Some bikes you can idle. They will just do a turn almost at idle with the throttle closed. But every bike's different. I don't recommend that either. Even if you think, or even if your bike will idle as a U-turn, I still recommend you give a little bit of throttle and use the clutch. That's going to give you the margin you need for adjusting between 5 miles per hour, 5.5 miles per hour, 4.5 miles per hour. You're not going to be able to do that just with the throttle, even if your bike can lug around a corner. So let's just talk about the actual technique. So like any corner, we're talking now about the U-turn itself. So now we've talked about going straight. We talked about things that can interrupt your drive. So when it comes to doing the actual turn, you have to keep that drive steady. we're throwing out 5 miles per hour as a number. You have to keep the speed at the point where that you can make the turn. Now, just like any corner, your lean angle, your speed, and the radius, they're all related. If you have a U-turn you need to make within a very tight, let's say 2 parking spaces, if you're in a parking lot, or in real world, you're needing to make a U-turn and not go off the shoulder on the other side of the road, that is your radius, and you are stuck with that. You can't make the road wider. In a parking lot, you can practice and you can make it as big or small as you want. But again, in the heat of battle, you've got a very restricted area in which to work in. And so that is your radius. And so speed, radius, and lean angle. At very slow speeds, nobody wants to lean their motorcycle because that's just scary as hell. And that's why motorcycles fall over. But you have to lean a motorcycle to actually let it turn when it's within a tight radius. Even in a large radius, it has to lean. And then, so the speed has to be fast enough that you have enough stability to actually ride the U-turn, but not so fast that then you have to lean so much to try to stay in that radius. Now you can do the same radius, you can do fast, but you have to lean the bike like crazy, or you can do it slower and you lean less, but you'll have less stability. So you find that happy place, and that's where practice comes in. And every bike's different. Like I say, any motorcycle that I get on that I'm going to spend any time on at all, that's the first thing I do is I do U-turns. First thing I did on this Tenere, same thing. I just want to know how it's going to handle because U-turns are something we do every day. We just want to feel as though we can master the motorcycle, and nothing kills confidence quicker than dropping a motorcycle. So anyhow. So the speed has to be set. And just like any corner, it's if you've ever been an MSF, they talk about the sequence of cornering is you enter a corner, you first slow, and then you lean the motorcycle as you look through the turn, and then you accelerate out. Same thing happens with a tight U-turn, because there's no different. It's a turn. It just happens to be a slow turn. So the speed has to be slow, but not too slow. The body position comes much more into play here because everything's amplified as far as your balance goes. When you're going slow, any little change in weight distribution could cause the bike to drop and fall, and gravity can take over. So the reason body position is important is that if we were to lean with the motorcycle at very slow speeds and high lean angles, gravity is going to take hold and it's going to want to drop the motorcycle into the turn. So we have to counter that. And that's why we counter weight, like this rider here is doing. You can see what he's got his body upright. Whether you shift your butt or not, we'll talk about that in a little bit. That's optional, but you have to keep your upper body straight up and down so that the motorcycle can lean underneath you at slow speeds. So, and then you need to look over your shoulder, because that is, again, there's more to it than simply a reductionist sort of view of like you go where you look. There's more to it than that, or so that you really want to obviously look where you want to be, not only for the fact that like on a normal corner, you want to see if it's safe, where you're going, but to look when you're going tight U-turns and you're looking, say, in the center of a circle or at the exit of your U-turn, you're telling your bike, your muscles, your mind, everything that this is where we're going. There's no negotiating this. And so you lock your eyes to the goal, to the exit. So it's a psychological part of it is very strong as well. So look where you want to go for sure, but believe that your eyes are going to tell you, no, this is where we're going. And when you get afraid, where do you look? You look where you're afraid to go. So you have to resist that. That's a human nature, that it's just part of riding a motorcycle. We do a lot of things when we ride a motorcycle that are not natural. It's not how we were wired. So to ride a motorcycle safely, you have to actually, that's what training is you have to untrain your natural instincts against certain things, and like target fixation. And in this case, that is target fixation. As soon as you start to, you're afraid that you're going to fall over, eyes come down, and then the bike typically comes down with it. So you keep your eyes up, and then you're able to let your muscles and kind of take over, and it'll finish the turn for you. you know, it's not magic. It does take practice, but so there's the look part of it. And when I'm doing a U-turn, my exit is over my shoulder. So I'm literally chin to shoulder. That's where my head turn is. And at the appropriate time, because as I'm making my U-turn, my eyes are ahead. But then before I turn, I'm looking to the center of the turn. And before I'm at the center, you know, the arc of the turn, then I'm looking toward the exit. Sound familiar? I hope so, because that's what we teach on the racetrack. And so you look where you want to go, and then you go where you're looking, and then next. So you're kind of breadcrumbing through the turn, and the same thing happens here. Okay, the lean part happens. This is the scary part. So you have to lean the bike. If you were to try to make a turn without leaning the motorcycle, for you to even come close to making the radius that you're aiming for, you'd have to turn the handlebars all the way to full lock. And even then you won't probably make the radius that you would need to. So the bike has to lean. So it's a combination of handlebar turn and lean angle. So they go together. And I remember Carolyn, my wife, when she was struggling with U-turns and I was working with her, the thing that realized that she was missing was she just wasn't turning the handlebars all the way. She was kind of leaning pretty good, but wasn't matching the handlebar turn. So the two go together. Once that happened, then things went much better. So you have to lean the bike, and then the front tire will naturally, and let it, turn into the corner. You can see in this photo how that front wheel is turned into the right in the direction that the bike is leaning. If you're tense on the handlebars, again, this should sound familiar because we talk about this when we're at speed training too, is that if you're tense on the handlebars, you're not letting the motorcycle self-balance and self-correct. So if we were in the garage and I had a motorcycle and I just straight up and down static, it's just sitting there, it's not running, and I lean it in one direction, what does the front wheel do? It naturally turns. Okay, so that's what's happening here. And if you're tense on the handlebars, you're not letting the handlebars move where they need to stay in balance. It's what it naturally wants to do. So that's just something else to consider, is if tension, it all sort of, there's a lot of dominoes fall when you're tense and you don't let the bike do what it wants to do, what it naturally will do to stay in balance. And so there's the turn the handlebars for direction and balance, because that is also going to keep the contact patch under the center of gravity when you turn the handlebars. And again, the steady drive, that steady drive is critical all the way through the turn. And then you accelerate out of the turn, just like with a normal turn. Remember, slow, look, press or lean and roll. Same thing happens here. You approach the turn at a speed that you can make, that you can safely negotiate. You lean the bike, you turn the handlebars, your eyes are up, and you accelerate out. And you, in the middle of the turn, you want to make sure that you maintain the speed that will give you the stability you need. Now, there's some options for techniques, and I'll talk about, like the option of squeezing the clutch and coasting through a U-turn, which is perfectly valid. But the fact is, even if you squeeze the clutch in the middle of the turn, you have to maintain speed that's going to allow the bike to remain stable and not fall over. So again, combination of speed, your body position, and then again, the lean angle and steering angle, that all has to match so that you make your radius. Otherwise, you're going to end up on the shoulder of the road. So, okay, and again, learn to relax at the bottom and believe you can do it. That's really something that you can't say enough about. This is a psycho game. I tell you, riding a motorcycle is so much more psychological than it is physical. Okay, there are a couple types of turns. One is a rolling, I'm talking U-turns here. One's a rolling U-turn. This is one where, you're already got stability, you're rolling along and you make your turn. Okay, you don't stop, you don't have to change your speed. You're just slowing down for the corner, just like you would if it was a normal turn out on the road. But now it's just going to be a tight turn. You've got plenty of space and you just roll up to where you want to turn. And then you've got the speed set, and then you execute just like we've been talking about. Turn your head, lean the bike, accelerate out. Okay, so those are the easy ones, and those are the ones you can work on when you're trying to get your U-turns tight. But a lot of times when folks start doing this, they feel pretty good, but then I go up there and go, okay, now do it slower. because that's the trick. I mean, you can do it fast and you'll have to lean a lot, but your radius is going to be huge. So the trick is to do it slower. And so it's not that hard to do a U-turn, at 10 miles per hour. That's actually pretty easy. You have to lean it pretty good and all that, but, and you're not going to make a tight radius at 10 miles per hour unless you're dragging foot pegs. So get it down to that speed that like 5, ultimately work for like 5 miles per hour. I typically will do on the Tiger, I can get it down to about 4. 7 is a piece of cake, 7 miles per hour. So just know that, what your bike is like and just work your way down to slower and slower speeds. So again, the idea that why the rolling U-turn is easy is because you've got your stability and you're just taking that stability into the corner. It gets a little trickier when you're at a stop. So now you're stopped and then you have to get going and make your U-turn because now you're starting at 0 miles per hour and 0 stability. So you don't have a whole lot of space oftentimes to get yourself up to speed. If you do, that's good. So then you roll from a stop, you get yourself up to that 5, 7, 8 miles an hour, and then you execute your turn. You've converted the from a stop turn to the rolling U-turn. Okay, that's if you have the space to do it. Sometimes we're in a situation where you have to, from a stop, don't have any space or very little space to get up to speed. In that case, you have to really get your speed from 0 to 5, 6, 7 miles per hour in maybe 5 feet or less. And so you get it up to speed and you immediately get yourself into the turn. And that's going to take, some more, some good control and the ability to really go from, again, 0 miles per hour, 0 stability to enough stability that you can actually make the turn.
And I've got a question whenever you're ready.
Yeah, okay, that's a good time.
Somebody was asking, is the technique different basically based on your bike being top heavy versus bottom heavy?
No, they're all the same. And I will say that every bike is different though. I'll give you an example. Oftentimes with students who are struggling, I'll get on their motorcycle if it's not a bike I've ridden, before or in a long time, and see what they're dealing with. And there was a woman once who, a very competent rider, but she struggled with U-turns, and she was on a Star, one of the Yamaha Star, big cruiser. And I said, let me see what you're dealing with. And I got on it and I was like, oh my God, this thing is like really hard to do a U-turn on. But I pulled out all the techniques that I'm talking to you about now, and I was able to make a pretty tight U-turn. But it was at another degree of precision needed to happen because the thing was so heavy and so unwieldy that it gave me no margin for, the clutch action had to be exactly right, the friction zone. The throttle had to be a little more elevated because, the nature of the motor as well gave a little more because I wasn't sure exactly how that clutch was going to work. So I didn't want to stall it. And then I had to, because of the bucket seat, I wasn't able to get my butt off. And also the handlebars were almost, kind of the rototiller handlebars. So the full lock turn had my outside arm being fully stretched, but the technique is the same. So I do find it really interesting to get on other bikes and to see what people have to deal with. And because we have to do these U-turns all the time, it can be a real bummer. And so this one woman, I just said, there are better bikes, for doing what we have to do sometimes. This bike is probably quite nice on the highway, but if it's such a drag to be having to maneuver it around in a parking lot, that could really kind of make it maybe that you might want to consider a different bike. But only because when I got on it, it was hard for me to do it, even so it would take her an awful lot of effort to get comfortable doing it on that bike. Another example is I got on an FJR 1300 once. Somebody who was doing okay with the U-turns, but I don't know, we were on a break and I said, I haven't ridden an FJR in a little while. I need to take it out on the parking lot because we were just, doing parking lot work. And I went out there and the bike, as soon as I tipped it in, the front tire immediately went to almost full lock. So again, it's the geometry of that bike. So I had to actually keep it from oversteering, because I didn't want, if it did that, then it would drop me on the side. So I had it leaned over and I had to kind of control that. So the technique is still the same, but it's the fact that I had to say, and with the FJR, I had to arrest that steering angle. That's just the nature of that bike. And it could be that if you change tires, that it would go away. It could be that it get worse. I mean, it could be tire pressure related. There's a lot of factors that can happen that way. But again, I will revert back. I cannot really think about any motorcycle that I've ridden where these basic techniques don't apply. So if I think about one, I'll bring it up later.
Yeah, I've got one more for you, Ken. For making uphill U-turns, does counterweight change need to occur more quickly?
Yeah, I actually have a slide about doing U-turns on slopes. It does. Because if you were to lean, you have to counterweight even more, and the bike will lean more underneath you, because the nature of how the bike has to lean when the bike is sloped this way and you're making a U-turn like that, the bike's going to want to fall, because of the nature of it being perpendicular on the ground. So you have to counter that. And so then once you get your momentum, you want to maintain momentum. So the uphill part is also, you can easily go too slow uphill because gravity. So you have to go in a little faster to accommodate the fact that gravity is going to slow you down. So you go in a little faster, and then this is a case where like squeezing the clutch is not a bad idea. And then you carry that momentum over, and then you let gravity accelerate you down the hill. So, that's, again, it's the same technique. It's just now variations on timing and kind of intensity of how much, whether you use the clutch more or the throttle more, and more body position. Because again, if you think about that same situation and my motorcycle is going up this way, if I were to lean it all my body this way, I'm going to have a hard time keeping that bike up. So I have to actually be even a little more extreme upright while the bike leans. So anyhow, I have a slide for that, but that actually goes into more detail on even what I was going to talk about. So we'll hit it again a little later. Anything else?
Oh, that's good now.
Okay, so let me finish this up here. The types of U-turns, there's one more, and that is the stopped when you have absolutely no space ahead of you to get up to speed. This is a case where sometimes, let's say you're coming out of a parking lot and you need to take a tight right turn, right? If you go wide, you can go into the oncoming lane, and there's something there. You just have to, you angled yourself kind of in a difficult position, and you can't get yourself up to speed because you'd end up in the oncoming lane or the other lane, because you cross your lane and go into the other lane. So you have to actually be able to make that turn almost from a stop. And so we practice this in the parking lot course, that you have to actually get yourself pre-positioned. The handlebar already has to be turned. You already have to be leaned when you haven't even rolled yet. You elevate your throttle, you ease out the clutch. And the trick is, though, everybody, as soon as they start rolling, they're afraid to lean, they straighten the bike up, and then you're back to going into the oncoming lane or the opposite lane. So the trick is to keep the motorcycle leaned and keep the handlebars turned as you ease out the clutch and go off that way. Again, I'm just explaining it. This, in words, it doesn't really, it's very hard to actually explain it without seeing it. And another thing I'll say overall here is that I'm so glad you all are here for the seminar, but don't think this seminar is going to make you a better rider. What makes you a better rider is applying this stuff. So, take notes if you need to, or, this will be recorded and you can see it again later if you need to. But you got to apply it. So the next time you're out on your bike, I highly recommend just go to the parking lot. You don't have to spend a ton of time doing this. But this is stuff that I have videos on my YouTube channel that I recommend that you take a look at. I talk about clutch control, and one that's specifically about U-turns and actually about uphill and downhill U-turns. So, but I do think it's titled clutch control. So let's see, what do I have next?
And one other question for you. For those who have automatic DCT bikes, what do you recommend for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this also comes up when it comes to ADV off-road riding, because like the Africa Twins, a lot of folks show up with the DCT. Those of you who don't know what the DCT is, there's no clutch. So it's like it's kind of like an automatic. And so how do you control that? Well, you control it with the brake, and the rear brake particularly. So you're going to be dragging your rear brake against the DCT to control your speed. So you'll have the throttle will actually be elevated a little bit more just to keep that gear engaged and getting your momentum forward. So that's the trick to that. Okay, so this slide here, here's some options because there's not one way to do a U-turn. Basically, the things I've been talking about aren't really negotiable as far as like your momentum and you know, even your vision, but you know, things that, you know, just the physics of keeping a motorcycle from falling over while you're doing a tight turn. Those things, there's really no option to that. However, how you do it, there are some options for. One is, do you drag the brakes? I drag my rear brake, and I do it in a specific way. I do it with a little bit almost like ABS. I like to just pulse it as I go around the corner. Excuse me, corner. I can get the speed to be very, very precise that way, as opposed to just trying to rely on one pressure on the rear brake. Why the rear brake? Because again, I mentioned before, it gives the motor something to drag against. It keeps that drivetrain tension under it. And also it helps me to refine even better my speed. So I can, if I have the clutch set, the throttle is like, I don't even move the throttle. I just get it slightly elevated and I've got the clutch doing its thing to adjust the speed from 5, 4.5, 5, 5.5. But if I use the rear brake, I can really almost get to 4 3/4, 5 1/4. I can get it so refined. And that's what gives me such confidence to be able to do U-turns. So dragging the rear brake. Why not the front brake? We talked about that. That front brake is very sensitive. Now, using front brake, doing U-turns is a technique, and it's more of an off-road technique that if you use that rear brake, it'll help load that front tire and help it come around. But for our purposes here, it's probably better to stay off it. Now, you're going to ask about linked brakes. And the fact is that most linked brakes are still proportional. So if you use the rear brake only, you are going to get some front brake, but it's not going to be the full power. So it's still going to be mostly rear brake. And I think BMW now has gotten smart, and under a certain speed that when you use the rear brake, the front brake does not get activated. So that's a good thing. Now, here's another one, is clutch in or out. So I tend to do my U-turns with the clutch in the friction zone all the way around the turn. But there's another technique that I absolutely have used, and it makes sense, is that if you can keep your momentum up, and then as you start making your turn, you squeeze the clutch in, and then as you exit the turn, you ease the clutch out. That works just fine. That's sometimes that's something that I prefer, but you have to have the momentum to make it all the way through the turn. You can't approach it kind of timidly and a little slow, and then halfway through the turn lose your momentum and then let the clutch out, and you could actually end up going off your radius unless you're really good about your clutch control. So again, it's just another way that you can do it. But again, the same thing is that you're just maintaining speed, whether you do it with the clutch in or out. That's sort of preference. Foot out or not. So this is something that I tend to teach feet up, and I think it's the way that you should probably keep or aim for. You do weight the outside foot peg. So this photo here of the guy on the Gold Wing, he's got most of his weight on his right foot peg, on his right leg, and he's got his upper body counterweighted, and the bike is leaning underneath him. So that's good. What I'm talking about here is foot out or not, is you can actually have your left foot, in this case for a left-hand turn, you can have it out slightly. And now what I mean slightly, I mean, you're not dragging it, but is there any reason why it should be up on the foot peg? Not really, if it's not in the way. So there's one school of thought on it, is that it will give you confidence to be able to do the U-turn. And when I do a U-turn, say from, I mentioned before, a U-turn from an absolute stop, and I need to make the turn, I don't have any runway to get myself up to speed. That is when I make that turn, I will do it and I'll keep my foot out about halfway around until everything's good, and then up, then the foot goes up. I'll even actually take one foot, one dab, and then get my feet up on the foot peg. But the reason is not that I'm going to save the bike. Remember, we talked about that. An 800-pound bike or something like that, I'm not going to be able to do anything with it. So it's not about that. It's just about, you don't need to rush to put your foot up on the foot peg. Now, if you have floorboards that are in the way and that kind of thing, you're going to have to keep that in mind. You have to get that foot up. You don't want to have your foot caught under the bike. So keep that in mind. Now, do you shift your butt off the seat or not? The guy in the Gold Wing has his right butt cheek is off the seat. That gives you more ability to counterweight. And it gives, when I want the bike to lean absolutely the most, I definitely get my butt off the seat and I really push the bike down right underneath me and turn those handlebars. But that's an option. You don't have to do it, but it is going to mean that you have to pivot on at your waist, because you have to stay upright. And if your butt is on the seat, but your body needs to stay upright, your butt's going to lean, but your upper body needs to stay upright. So that's why getting your butt off the seat kind of allows your butt to, and your body to be, to be able to counterweight. This next one here, K-turn or go for it. This is a case where when we're talking about, I have another slide coming up about, sometimes it's just better to not attempt a rolling or riding U-turn. Just get through it. Don't be a hero. Don't drop your bike. That said, challenge yourself too, but sometimes you just, K-turn, if you don't know, is that you're this way and you want to make a U-turn this way, is you just go up and you do this and off you go. That's a K-turn. It's fine. Now, that's actually something that should always be in your toolbox as far as an option, because let's say I'm making this U-turn here and I come around and I realize I'm not going to quite make it. I stop, I straighten the bike, make sure, remember, I'm leaning this way, I would fall over. So I have to straighten the bike, I stop, I back up, and then I continue on. That's a K-turn. So that's having a plan B. You have to make sure that you can do that. So again, I have a whole slide on this. Let me set that aside for a moment. Now, do you stand or sit? Now, when it comes to standing, I can do my tightest U-turns on the Tiger standing, because I can really counterweight. I'm decoupled from the bike. Now I can really get the motorcycle leaned over, and my legs are the thing that's, sort of keeping me connected to the bike, and my butt's not even on the seat. But it's another option. If there's a lot of folks out there riding GSs and, bikes that are pretty easy to stand up on, and give that a try. Same technique. You still got to want to drag that rear brake and all that. So I will say that one of the times last time I dropped my bike, the Tiger, was off-road, standing, doing a U-turn, and I stalled. All right, everything was going good, but I stalled. So because I was standing and I hit a bump and it was kind of rolly, I must have let the clutch out that like 1/16 of an inch too much, and it stalled. I should have had the throttle up higher, and that wouldn't have happened. And the last thing is this option here is the keyhole maneuver. What's that? So this little diagram down here, if you can get this little maneuver to happen, then you can get into the lean quicker and sooner, and you will make your turn tighter. So it's the idea that you're going this way, you go like that and like this. We've kind of all seen that before, this and that. Do that. You can't always do it. Like if you had a curb right here or something, you're not going to necessarily be able to do that. And again, if you have the space to do it, that also has to happen. If you don't have the space, then you're not going to be able to use that technique. But try that, because it does help a lot. By the time you're here, you're now, your body position, your head is turned, your throttle, everything is all steady. Your speed is all set right here. And then you pick up your speed as you exit the turn right in here. Okay. So this is the evaluation, the considerations before you even attempt a U-turn. You got to ask yourself, all right, was this a good place for me to stop and make a U-turn? You can see the photo in the lower right, the limited sight distance photo. That would be a really stupid place to attempt a U-turn, because if things don't go really well and you end up dropping your bike in the middle of the road and some Mack truck comes up over the hill, it doesn't see you, you got real trouble there. So you have to make sure that you make your turns in places that are going to allow you success, if things don't go well, because they're not going to always go perfect. The photo on the top shows a dropped off shoulder. So if your front wheel were to drop off that pavement, you got yourself some issues there too. So first thing I do when I look and see if there's a U-turn I need to do is, well, what's my potential, fail point, and what are the consequences of that? Because if say like the photo on the top, if that was pretty, pretty easy, and even if it was a little gravel, if it was packed gravel, I might still attempt it, because the consequences of going off the pavement, not quite getting it done on the pavement, they're not huge consequences. But you have to be able to evaluate that from the other side of the road, because presumably you're making a U-turn, from one lane into the other. But right there is like, is there enough space to do this? If not, then plan on a K-turn, or go someplace else. Go down the road and find a big parking lot. You know, there's going to be a better spot for you to turn around. Right? Don't, you know, just be smart. Can the bike do it? You have to look at it and say, well, there's might be enough space, but you know what? This bike, it just does not like you doing U-turns. So I'm not going to attempt it here and then move on. Can you do it? Well, that's the big question, isn't it? It's typically the rider who's got the limitations, not the bike. So you have to be confident that you can make that U-turn. And the only way you're going to know that is by practicing and measuring. You have to measure, because if you go into a parking lot, I try to get U-turns within 2.5 parking spaces. Then that's pretty good. You know, I try to get them even tighter on smaller bikes, but if you can do that, then that gives you a pretty good idea of what, you know, 2 lanes are. And that'll get you staying well enough away from the edge of the road. But again, measure it, because then you'll have an idea of, you know, is this doable or not? Again, what are the consequences of failure? Can you bail halfway if necessary? So that's something that if you end up with that K-turns scenario, are you going to be able to? It could be that halfway around, if you were to stop, you're on some sort of weird slope, or there's like some surface hazard or something, that if you put your foot down, then you fall down because your foot slipped. So you have to evaluate that too. Don't lock yourself commit yourself into something that if it doesn't go well, that you're going to just make things really bad for yourself. Is the environment safe? That's sort of the addition, the photo in the lower right. Is there a better alternative? Is the way your bike is loaded, is it a factor? Have you practiced doing your U-turns with your bike fully loaded? Camping gear, whatever you typically have, including a passenger. So with the parking lot course, I occasionally get a passenger comes along, and we work on tight U-turns and stuff with a passenger. Whether you do it with the parking lot course or whether you do it on your own, if you suddenly are faced with having to do a U-turn with a passenger, and you're doing that passenger, you're risking that passenger's safety. And that's the case of anytime you have a passenger on the back. So, you know, in the end, you have to practice. Now, if you are oftentimes with a passenger, you really do have to bring your passenger, you and your passenger, to the parking lot. And you have to do emergency braking practice and these tight maneuvers with your co-rider, because that person who's on the back also has to know what to do. And they have to be if they freak out in the middle of a tight U-turn, that's going to affect you. So you have to actually know that your co-pilot is on board with this. So we talked a little bit about slopes and traversing hills. So we talked a bit about that. You have to also consider that slope is not only like a hill, like in the photo here, but it's also can be just camber. And gravity will affect your speed. And we talked a bit about that when I was talking about the hill. But there are times even in a parking lot that looks pretty level, but it very well may be that as you go this way, you're uphill. And as soon as you make your turn, now you're going downhill. And the downhill can happen at the time where it actually accelerates you before you want to accelerate, and it'll open up your radius, and it could cause you to go off the road. So you have to sort of be able to evaluate the slope and know that you have to either, you know, go slow. Let's say it's a downhill and you're making a U-turn downhill, you have to slow down, but not so, you know, and because gravity will speed you up. So you have to control gravity, control the speed. And then as you make the turn, now you're going uphill. So you have to get your clutch out earlier and keep your throttle open, you know, elevated even more. And then you're now accelerating against gravity. And that's just, you know, relatively flat. It will affect your timing of your clutch and your throttle, even on what appears to be a relatively flat parking lot. The rear brake use, again, that's the thing about being careful when it's going downhill, that rear brake. And if it's a steep downhill and you're making a turn, you have to control that. You know, it's just better if you can drag that rear brake and have the bike hook around and control that speed against gravity. Your body position, same like we talked about before, depending on if you're making a turn, you know, this way, or if you're making the turn uphill this way too, that's all going to affect, you know, your body position needs to, you know, make it so that you're not letting gravity lever you over. So traversing hills is, you know, we end up leaning the bike, because you still have to lean the bike even down a hill. So if we have the hill here, the bike has to lean down the hill to make the turn. And so we keep our body upright. And again, look, this looking over your shoulder, to your exit is critical. I also want to just talk about hairpin turns, because they are essentially tight U-turns, but they're oftentimes they're a little faster, but there are some, this is our own Bob Levin right here in this photo. We were in the Alps together. Some of these turns, especially like this one here, they're uphill hairpins, and they're as tight as any U-turn that I would do in a parking lot. And you throw in traffic coming the other direction, and you throw in a pretty steep slope and maybe even a pothole and some sand. But it's the same technique. You still control your speed in, you look, you lean, and very tight turns, I will counterweight, for these tight hairpin turns. This one actually isn't very tight. When I'm talking about the hairpins that we encounter in some of the places in Europe when we're traveling, that they're like goat paths, and the U-turns are going to be like up this, and the road will actually come back on itself, and it's uphill. And so it's the same thing though. I will actually, if I were to lean with the bike and that sort of situation, gravity is going to want to pull the bike over. So I will counterweight that bike, my body, up around that turn. So it's often a slope, and off camber is another thing too that you have to deal with. So if the road slopes away like this, now you're now traversing a hill. So that camber is the same as what we've been talking about doing U-turns. So this is actually a positive camber. Sometimes you have to do a U-turn against negative camber. So, it gets tricky, but the technique is the same. It's just variations in how much you lean your body out. And that would be pretty much it. It would be the matter of body position is almost the thing that would most noticeably be different. And then it's a matter of timing of your clutch and your throttle to make sure that you maintain your momentum that you need and your balance. And again, rear brake use, when I'm going downhill, let me see if this next slide. Yeah, downhill, I need to trail brake. And again, this would be a tight turn. Now, this is our own Bob Levin and Mike McGilla right there on our trip that we did to the Alps. And so with a downhill tight U-turn hairpin, you're going to end up also dragging the rear brake, but you're going to drag it into the turn to control gravity, control the effects of gravity. So you're going to trail brake into that turn. You're going to keep that speed controlled against gravity. And it could be off camber, same thing. You're going to counterweight as you need to. If you have your speed up anything more than, I don't know, 10 miles an hour, you could probably lean with the bike. Depends on the bike. But, again, that would be another change, is that if a bike is really, really top heavy, I might then counterweight more often than if a bike had lower center of gravity. I might then not feel the need to counterweight so much.
Hey, Ken, question whenever you're ready. But how is it different with that downhill U-turning on the gravel?
Oh, and gravel? Well, there's nothing different except that now you're going to have to deal with the surface bouncing you around a little bit, and it's going to take your handlebars like that. So it's going to also cause tension. But the technique is the same. And when we do tight U-turns off-road, and I do, dual sport and ADV training as well, and I bring folks to the parking lot and we do U-turns, tight maneuvers, sitting and standing, because this is ADV, adventure bike stuff. And then I bring them out back where it's dirt and gravel. And we do the same thing. It's just dirt and gravel. That's all there is to it. Downhill, the difference, of course, with downhill when it comes to gravel as opposed to pavement is your traction and your availability of your traction. So if you need to make that U-turn and you want to do it with your feet up as opposed to, doing it with your feet down and paddle walking, which again, if you have to do it, don't worry about it. Don't drop your bike. So if traction is pretty sketchy, then you might need to sit down and just sort of get yourself through it. And especially if it's downhill, you're going to have to kind of evaluate that, whether the traction's there for you, because that front tire is your issue. Because if it gets in there and it starts getting into gravel, it's going to push, and you need to be able to, try to avoid that. But the bike has to lean to make the turn. So you have to lean so you can't avoid that. So you're just trying to keep it so that with your body upright, this is talking now more about off-road riding, but with your body upright, counterweighting the way you've been talking about, it also increases, it loads the tire into the surface when you have your body upright and the bike is leaning. So anyhow, that's another conversation. But so that's what it's, again, the answer is still, the technique is essentially the same. Yeah. Okay, so you know what? I think I've covered everything.
The question, I'm just trying to figure out what it says.
Okay.
I'll just read it to you. It says, when making a right hand turn at an intersection, counter lean if starting from stop, and lean with bike if it's a turn at speed.
That would be about right. Yeah. So when you're going slow and you need that bike to lean, you need to counterweight. If you're going faster, you don't need to counterweight, because gravity, all the dynamics that are going on when you're rolling along on a motorcycle at speed is going to allow you to lean with the bike. So gravity cannot overcome all the dynamics that are happening when you're rolling at even like 10 miles an hour, maybe a little bit faster. Again, some bikes are a little bit more top heavy. So that's where that question about, is it any different for different bikes? Essentially, no. But when it comes to, the balance in the motorcycle, yeah. But yes, when you're stopping and you need to make a tight turn out of a driveway onto a road, the thing is, you want to get that bike leaned and handlebars turned. And if you were to lean with it at that point, it would be very hard to keep the bike held up with your leg. So you keep your body upright and the bike leans, and then off you go. And as soon as you get your speed up, then you can center yourself on the bike.
Great. Well, listen, thanks everybody for joining us tonight. Keep in mind that we'll be doing these every Wednesday at 6:30. They'll be posted up in New England Riders, as well as Ken's site, Riding at the Zone. Again, thanks, Ken, for joining us and putting this together. And we'll see you all next week.
Awesome. Take care, folks.
Thanks, guys.